We're live.
Wonderful.
So thanks so
So
much.
much done.
I should have waited. I could see you doing that, but it was a cruel beginning. But thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. We're just a little church in Brighton, and we're really encouraged by the book. Those of us who have decided to do it, several of us have already read it. Several of us have listened to your dulcet tones already read it to us. So that's been really nice, and really feel like it's an important book, and it's going to be great for us as a church community. So thank you for writing it. Tell us a little bit about you, if you don't mind. You can take that off any direction you want to,
Hmm.
but just, in terms of the person who wrote this book, how do you best describe yourself and your experiences?
Yes, that question always gives me an existential crisis.
Yeah.
Uh, um, so I think that one of the key threads that I've been pulling on is about cultural stories, and I don't know where it came from. Really, I was sort of bookish child, very interested in stories in general, and drama and theatre, and the imagination, and how we engage with the world. Through those parts of ourselves. I went on to study English and history, which was very helpful for thinking about, okay, what's going on in the world and what are the stories that we're telling about this moment and how those two things interrelate. That led me to work at the BBC for 5 years and then run Theos. And so, what is the story that we're telling, and how does it make some things possible and some things feel impossible? What does it tell us about what a human being is, what a good life is, whether it's possible that there is love beyond us, that justice exists, all these things. I think I probably would have been interested in those things anyway. And
Mm.
then because I became a Christian in this kind of ecstatic experience in my teens, and then sort of lost my faith, or at least tried to, and then have found my way back, the way that relates to faith and the stories that we tell about God and other people and this strange old wisdom path have always been of interest too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the language you use and a lot of the way that you couch the whole thing really is very much would be at home with one church people. But for you personally, where are you at now with faith and your understanding? I mean, a fundamental question I guess I want to ask. I was going to ask this at the end, but it feels like a good point to ask it. Is the book is about being fully alive. And I guess I just at the beginning, what do you feel that faith plays or God plays in being fully alive? Is it possible to be fully alive without God? And where do you yourself, even post the book, find yourself in your kind of faith journey right now?
Great question. I mean, encounter with the love of God is everything for me. And it's everything kind of follows from there, that if God is real, right, and loves us and created us out of an abundance of delight, right, an abundance of creativity, and that the dance and the conversation and the relationship and the love at the heart of the Trinity spilled over into us, and we are reflecting that back, then yes, fully aliveness can't help but be related, right? That my kind of the sort of fancy term of the Trinitarian anthropology really does undergird a lot of my intuitive, instinctive feeling about the world, that we are made for relationship, we're made for each other, we are made by each other, and that is where life is. And I think even for people who are struggling to understand the love of God, or just haven't got the imaginative framework for it, or are feeling very scared of that concept for understandable reasons, then focusing on the aliveness in the relationships with our own soul and with other people and the earth is a really great place to start. In terms of my own faith, I feel for a while I've been in. Paul Ricoeur is a kind of theological philosopher, and he talks about a second naivete. And I think because I found it and then had a major crisis and then found my way back in, I'm just delighted by how much beauty and how much goodness and how much wisdom is in this thing, much more than I thought there was, or was that I was ever taught, that it's not some sort of narrow moral system. That it's a way of seeing and being in the world that feels very humane and humanizing, and that frankly glimpses and the moments I get when I still myself and I've sort of quietened my busy mind and had a shred of discipline for some contemplative practice or charismatic worship, the moments of, oh, hello, you. The sense of being met and perceived by love are what I live for.
Thank you. That was profound and beautiful. Thank you. I think a lot of us would feel in that second naivete that you describe and encountering the God of love, that maybe even knowing God, it was God's self that stood in the way of knowing God, because we were suspicious of him and built up all of these things and an ability to understand grace and everything else. The thing that fascinates me about this book is you kind of remove that. So God is love, but then said the thing that's in the way of our fully aliveness is sin or other words that are used to describe it. And so it just took us through the kind of mechanism that you decided to use. I think you talk about disconnection and connection as being, ways to understand sin or lack of aliveness. But I think it's fascinating that you've done quite an old thing, I suppose, by looking at those 7 deadly sins. What made you decide to do that, and why is that a useful way for us to understand aliveness or deadness?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't what I started out trying to do at all. So my kind of gifts are all around communication, and having had this long, complicated journey with faith and feeling really powerfully the beauty and the goodness of it, I have had this bee in my bonnet about how far that beauty and goodness is from the cultural stories that are told about it, and therefore how most of my friends receive this signifier of Christianity, right? The associations that they have with it are so different from the associations I have with it that I wanted to close that gap a bit. And in like old school church lady language, you could say I'm an evangelist, and I'm sort of reasonably happy with that, although there's some negative associations I'd want to avoid. And so the book was designed to be translating the treasures of my tradition for those who might not be familiar with it. Not really written for Christians at all. Honestly, I didn't know that it would be helpful for Christians. I thought Christians might be like, yeah, I know all that. Right. So I'm really delighted that it's helpful for Christians. I also thought we'd be sweary, too frank about sex. But I set out trying to translate the treasures of the tradition for those outside the church. And I had some themes. I had like attention and ritual and a kind of defense of the Christian sexual ethic and the Christian nonviolent tradition and peace building, and some stuff about the kind of climate crisis and avarice. I knew what I wanted to write about. And I have this wonderful agent who's not religious at all. And she says, you need a framing. You need some sort of structure for these essays. So I went away and was, trying different things, poems, and eventually I sort of I was like, oh no, it's the 7 deadly sins. I don't want to write about 7 deadly sins. But went back to her and was like, does this work? And she was like, actually, I think it does, because it's a cultural meme more than it's actually not taught that much in churches, is it? No. It seems like more of a historical concept than a religious concept, basically. And there's like ice cream ranges and horror story cycles about it. Yeah. So it was forced on me, and then I had to sit down and go, what do I think sin is? And as it turns out, I had some real thoughts, and it became it's a really helpful impetus for me articulating why I still find this concept useful and helpful and humanizing for self-reflection and for repair and restoration. So I'm really glad I got there, but that was not where I thought I would end up.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. I was sort of surprised by it, but found it really sort of rooting and earthing, and again, the honouring of, just because it's an old thing and seen as a bit of a medieval sort of hangover, it was real enough that Evagrius or whoever decided to codify it and go, actually the human condition hasn't changed very much, has it? And it is the stuff that's stopping us being fully alive.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through your book. What would be your hope that somebody in the One Church community going through this and seeing, what would bring you joy to sort of think that has done its intended job for people reading this?
So the feedback I get that means the most is when people say, it made me feel better, which sounds very sort of self-helpy, but by it, I mean, there's a relief in listening in on another random everyday Christian being honest about how complex some of this is, and doubt and faith and mistakes and longings, and being interested both in having a luminous soul and not too many wrinkles, and therefore spending a lot of time thinking about serums, right? The honest thing is, I don't read that many Christian books because they seem very careful and worried about getting things wrong, and therefore quite boring, or very angry and keen to attack everyone else being wrong and reject things they've left behind. And so I hope there's a sense of relief at people recognizing something of themselves and the way they think and speak, even if they're coming to conclusions from me, just the sense of here's the mess of humanity as we try and navigate, our way through this. I hope it leaves Christians feeling a bit more confident, not in a like take back our culture way, but in a actually there is beauty and wisdom and goodness and truth here. Don't need to be embarrassed about it. And maybe that is something they could give their friends. That would be the dream.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And just finally, I mean, maybe sort of double back on almost the last thing you just said, but there'd be people part of our community who wouldn't use the word Christian, perhaps are coming with other kind of faith background or none at all. What do you think is the kind of unique Christian contribution to your work? What is the sort of thread that earths it, other than just being another good self-help book?
I mean, I sort of feel that's not for me to say, but my hope is that I don't think I would be a Christian without the person of Jesus being so compelling and enigmatic. And actually, so many of the things that I believe about what a human is and what a good life is are both out of his life and teaching, but particularly the strangeness of this central symbol of the crucifixion and resurrection. And the way what that does is it makes suffering really central to the Christian faith. That a place where divine love stands in solidarity with our suffering and accompanies us in our suffering and is no stranger to our suffering, I find really, really helpful. And it's the opposite of that kind of triumphalist, prosperity gospel thing. It's the way we live in Holy Saturday, right, between the crucifixion and the resurrection in lots of ways. And so, yeah, I must that thread, the sort of the Jesus who weeps and the Jesus who has a body and knows what it is to be in pain and be rejected by your friends, right? That Jesus could be God is sort of mind-blowing, but very central to my understanding of what a good life looks like, to be moving, not to try and avoid that part of our humanity, but to be being tender with it in ourselves and each other.
Thank you. We'll let you know how things go.
I really hope you enjoy it, and I love people being in conversation with me about it, so feel free to
we're really grateful.
send some thoughts.
Thanks.